Hello, and welcome to another World of UX podcast. This is your host, Darren Hood. Welcome, everybody, and a special welcome to those of you joining us today for the very first time. Welcome to the show. I keep talking to people who say they're going all the way back into the archives. This is episode number 236, I do believe. Don't quote me on that. I'm taking a wild guess, but I think I'm pretty close, if not directly on point. And yeah, just confirmed it. Yeah, episode 236. We've been broadcasting now for, it's at our 4th anniversary earlier this year. Just really happy about some of the accomplishments that we have. But most importantly, we're excited about the content. We're excited to share things that will vault people forward. We're excited to share things to help people who are interested in being on that proper road to UX. We're happy to be able to share information that's going to help people accomplish exactly that. So happy for that today. Today, on today's episode, we're going to continue. There were some additional thoughts that came up after last week's show. That was initially thought to be a 1-week thing, and it was not going to be a series of shows on the same topic, but some other things came up. Some people brought some things up that were interacting with me. There were certain things that came back to the forefront of my mind. So we're going to continue talking about the topic of UX and the culture of unrealistic expectations. It's funny too, and I gotta say this. There was someone who reached out to me on one of the platforms, and they were expressing their thoughts about what I had said about companies ghosting people. It's funny how it's just funny that people will have opinions and they don't realize there's opinion, there's expert opinion. And when someone, and this is not meant to slight anybody, I used to be a beginner at some point, but when I was just starting out, I did not sit there, listen to what the people that went before me say, and then dismiss it because it didn't match what might be or might qualify as an anchoring bias. When I was in my earlier stages in the discipline, I was all about learn. And the funny thing is, I've been doing this now. I keep saying 28, it's 29 years now. I've been doing this now for 29 years, and I'm still learning. I'm always learning, and I always want to hear somebody out. If there is something that somebody says that I question, then I want to go and investigate that. I want to hear those individuals out to see whether or not what they're saying is legitimate, if it's trustworthy. We're taught to do that in our doctoral work. It's a good thing to do for anybody to do. You don't have to be a PhD or PhD candidate to strive to understand when something is trustworthy, when it's reliable, when it's accurate. That's something that is at the core of what every user experience professional does, no matter what level you're at. And if you're just starting out, if nobody has ever told you that, I'm telling you that today, that is at the core of everything that we do. If a user experience professional presents something and it's not trustworthy, it's not reliable, that's going to come back. It's going to haunt you. It's going to hurt your users. It's going to hurt your team. It's going to hurt your company. It's going to hurt everybody. So you always want to ground yourself in things that are accurate, things that are reliable. And the things that I mentioned about what happened when somebody ghosts you, when you apply for a job and you don't hear back, it's overrated. Hearing back, number one, what I said was expecting to hear back from every company is unrealistic. So it's funny how people want to retort about something that you're saying and aren't really responding to what you said. It's funny. That's the straw man approach. And that's what a lot of people do when they don't like what you said and they did hear what you said, but they know they can't fight against what you said. So they create a false thing to shoot at, so to speak. And that's what some people do. Every company can't respond. So I'm not going to recap all the points from last week, but I will say this now. If you think every company is going to respond, not only is it unrealistic, but it's selfish because you only want them to respond because it's you. Do you want them to respond to everybody? If you were not a player, if you didn't have a horse in the race, so to speak, and you want everybody to respond, then now it's not just you. So people they formulate certain thoughts because of how it impacts them on a personal level. And that's something else. If you're going to succeed at UX isn't about you. It's not about me. It's about the whole. It's about the users. It's about the business. It's not about our personal preferences, and it's not about what benefits us at the individual level. So throw that stuff out. And when somebody does that, if you do that, it lets you know where you are. It lets you know where you are. It is not realistic to expect every company to respond to you. And if they did respond, who said they're right? Because a lot of the people that do give feedback, I've received jaded feedback before. I've received feedback that let me know that the people giving the feedback assume that everybody that they're giving feedback to is just starting out. And a lot of times it's some arrogant startup person that does something like that. Everybody doesn't need to hear back from you. Everybody thinks they're Elon Musk. And they think that whatever they say is worth its weight in gold. And that's simply not the case. And the last thing anybody needs is, we hear people all the time talking about things like constructive criticism. And then if you always say or think about constructive criticism, but you don't realize that there's a thing called destructive criticism, you're setting yourself up for failure anyway. If somebody talks you into fixing what's not broken, that's destructive criticism. If somebody says something to you and it's not accurate, that's destructive criticism. If somebody says something to you and they set you on a trajectory that's not in your best interest, that's destructive criticism. And again, since this is a little sidebar, I guess, it's the third time I'm mentioning this, something that is at the core of what every user experience professional does is critical thinking. In order to excel at the discipline of user experience, a person must excel at being a critical thinker. If a person cannot excel, will not excel, does not excel at being a critical thinker, then you are limiting what you can accomplish. You're limiting how you can benefit others, whether it be the benefit, the users, your team, whoever it is. You have to be a committed critical thinker. That is the only way that we can excel at this craft. So I needed to speak to that. I tried to say something to the individual that made that point, and they weren't hearing it. And after 2 times of trying to help somebody, I'm done. I'm out. Especially when, if you say the sky is blue and somebody wants to have some long, elaborate conversation, that's not really a conversation. They're not listening to you. So I'm not going to waste energy in those types of situations. That person is not listening. They are talking. And some people are so in love with hearing themselves talk that they'll continue trying to get that person to quote unquote see the light. You can't help a person see the light if their eyes are shut. So if their eyes are willfully shut, there's nothing you're going to be able to do for that individual. And you have to be able to recognize that. It's funny, being self-aware is trait number 1 associated with a high level of emotional intelligence, but you also have to be able to see who somebody else is. And when you see who somebody else is, that should help you understand what your next step should be. I love helping people. I love vaulting people forward, but I also recognize when somebody doesn't really want to go forward and they're just in the business of occupying space. I'm not saying that's what that person was doing. I'm saying you need to be able to understand that. And so when somebody is doing that, got to see yourself out of that conversation. It's not a good thing. But let's go ahead and we've got 5 unrealistic expectations that I want to share, plus a bonus item. So let's go ahead and dive in, shall we? Number 1. Unrealistic expectation number 1 that I am observing, that I hear people talk about on a consistent basis, and unfortunately, is something that a lot of people who are making decisions in UX space are embracing this as well. We're going to cross into that arena a little bit today with some of these. Some people, they really truly believe that if you want to excel, that you need to just know Figma. And this is a little related to something I was talking about on social media recently. I didn't mention it last week, but there's some people, they think that if you know Figma, it's a secret sauce. That's the unrealistic expectation. They think that if you know any particular tool, fill in the blank. It doesn't have to be Figma, because UX is not about tools. UX is a tool agnostic discipline. It is excelling at UX is separate from any tool. I don't care what the tool is. I don't care what the language is. We're far away from languages, and the vast majority of UX positions out there don't require any association with any type of language whatsoever. I don't care what somebody's saying. You need to learn how to code. That's a completely different thing. And the people who believe that a lot of times have never worked in enterprise. Because if you work in enterprise and you're doing UX work, you're not coming anywhere near code. And people will say, well, but the more you know code, the more you'll be able to talk to the people who do the code, Darren. Not true. And it's funny how people will say something to you as if you don't have certain experience. I have worked in enterprise, remember, 29 years, and including working at the largest, at the time, the largest digital design agency in the world. And at the time, Digitas LBI had that crown. They held the crown of that. And interestingly, every time I worked at a creative agency, everybody stayed in their lane. That's what made the agency go. The QA people were in their lane. The product owners were in their lane. The account managers were in their lane. The programmers, the engineers, whatever you call them, because they have different titles, but we know who they are. They were in their lane, and the UX people were in their lane. And everybody knew what everybody else's responsibility was, and everybody respected everybody else's lane. And that's how we were able to accomplish so much, because we recognized, we understood, and we paid respect to, or we respected other lanes. So I dealt with people who did programming all the time. And the only thing that knowing, and by the way, yeah, I do have a programming background to some extent. And that knowledge that I had, what it did for me was it enabled me to be more empathetic towards the people that were doing it, but it didn't enhance the way we were working too much. And if I didn't have any knowledge about programming, and it was by no means was my knowledge and expertise with regard to programming on the same line as those people that I worked with that were programmers, that were engineers, things of that nature, I knew enough to have respect for what they were doing and respect them. That's what it afforded me. But if you have high EQ, you can do the same. You don't have to know somebody else's job like the back of your hand in order to execute that same thing. So it's not what people say. Some people say it because it sounds cute. Some people say it because they're trying to endear themselves to someone that feels that way. Folks, it simply isn't a thing. And somebody will come back at me like the person did last week when I was talking about the issues associated with being ghosted. And they're doing that because that's what they want to be true, not because it is true. The facts already speak for themselves. And that's why it's just funny to watch somebody who wants to argue, because the mere fact anybody wants to argue lets you know something is wrong. There's nothing to argue about. Facts are facts. Truth is truth. And nobody can change that. Just because you're loud about it or just because you keep a conversation going doesn't make that thing any more true. And the fact that you're the last one saying something doesn't mean that it's true. So it's just not a thing. UX work does not require knowledge of any programming whatsoever. We are not the subject matter experts of everything that we engage with whatsoever. But we need to respect who the SMEs are. We always need to respect who the SMEs are, because it is the input, the knowledge, the support of the SMEs and vice versa that helps us to achieve that sweet spot between user needs, business needs, and constraints. Folks, that's just how it is. And somebody doesn't like it, and then they start screaming. And again, like I said before, they're that little kid sitting in the middle of the store, whatever the store, you name the store, yelling and screaming, and their mother trying to get them to get up. And they're just sitting there just throwing a fit, having a tantrum. And a lot of what is going on in UX circles today is nothing more than somebody having a tantrum. They don't have any facts to back any of it up. None. All they have is a bunch of people in a mutual admiration society willing to support them at best. The facts don't support these things. We don't need. Show me somebody that knows a programming language. Let me work on the same project and watch and see who gets somewhere further, because I know the actual UX, the components. I know how to actually get the work done. Programmers, the more they know about a business does not help them get their work done. That's something that falls into the lap of the UXer, the project managers, the product owners, those kinds of people, the people that do that. The people who are doing the straight up IT stuff can just go and do their IP stuff. They never need to come in contact with any of the data associated with any of the users, the customers, in order to get their job done. Nobody can change that. You can turn off the podcast right now, whatever. It doesn't change anything. That simply is the truth. So at any rate, went on a little tangent there away from the point. The point is, and I do want to call out Figma specifically, knowing Figma is not a secret sauce. And there are people coming into the discipline, and that's what some people are teaching them. You need to get better at Figma. The social media post that I did a few days ago had to do with someone where I saw them saying that if you want to be a senior, you need to learn Figma, as if being more technologically adept when it comes to Figma is going to make you a better UX practitioner. That couldn't be further from the truth. It's not. And this is interesting because this mindset is being promoted in a day when people don't want to know anything about UX fundamentals. Matter of fact, someone else said, you don't need to know any UX fundamentals. You just need to know Figma better. Somebody literally actually said that. That's not a joke. Somebody actually said that. And a bunch of people were nodding their heads in agreement, and they left that presentation, they left that statement going out to get better at Figma, and they don't care anything about UX fundamentals. UX fundamentals are the difference between success and failure, not what a person knows about Figma. Not to mention the fact, so you can learn Figma. Figma is a finite science. Dealing with Figma is a finite science. Dealing with things associated with UX methods, methodologies, techniques, and deliverables, that's an infinite science. That requires real work. It requires some effort. It requires you having your head on a swivel. It requires somebody learning how to pivot on a dime. And learning how to do Figma doesn't do any of those things. And people keep trying to limit UX to these finite elements. And every time somebody does it, they're selling you a bill of goods that simply does not, it is not reflective of who we are. So folks, knowing Figma, you know what that gets you? It makes you better at Figma. It does not make you at all, in any way, form, or fashion, not 1 millimeter, does it make you better at UX. So please know and understand that. Number 2, it's funny, somebody made a statement and they said that being a specialist, they'll tell you, do you want to be in design or research in UX? Which one do you want to do? And it's pretty funny because prior to 2011, there were no specializations. Everybody, if you were in UX, you did design and research. And somebody had the grand idea. I've talked about this before, but it has to be included with this set of unrealistic expectations. Somebody decided that being a specialist was good. Maybe you should just focus on design. Maybe you should just focus on research. And out of that, a lot of weird things came. People started creating different UX goals or UX positions, UX functions. People started really sort of segmenting and oversimplifying what UX was. It was during that time that that whole UX/UI thing started to become popular because it wasn't a thing. Nobody was saying UX UI in 2009. Or if they were so grossly in the minority that you did not see people doing that. You see that in probably 7 out of 10 posts today in the vast majority of job postings. You see people who are talking about UX/UI. Companies are talking about UX UI. They need somebody to be sound in UX UI. Nobody was saying this stuff. So when the specializations came along, they were actually dividing us, and they were dividing the goals. They were actually really sort of diluting the goals of people that were coming into UX. And I'm not going to say that because today you can get into a specialist role. You can. It's a reality. But I love someone that came on the show previously said they likened specializations onto the medical field. And they talked about how that if you really want to get some really good health care, somebody to take care of whatever your needs are, that you want a specialist, that somebody who's a generalist is not gonna thrive at that. And I understand, I'd never heard that before, and I thought it was a pretty good way to approach it. I thought it was a pretty good metaphor, but I also, and you can go back and listen to the episode where I said it, it also is not a completely sound metaphor, in that when you change the scenario, for example, a smaller town, when you go to a smaller town, you don't see a specialist. There's a town doctor, or there's a small group, I should say, of town doctors, and none of them are specialists. Here's the funny thing. I know people that are doctors. Okay, I know a lot of people down here who are doctors, and even people who are specialists, they all had to come up pretty much the same ranks. And they know things about arenas of health where they're not specialists. Their knowledge is not limited to their specialization. And that's where I come back with this. If you want to thrive at research, the more you know about design, the better researcher you'll be. If you want to thrive at design, the more you know about research, the better designer you'll be. When it comes to both, you need to know more about UX strategy, which a lot of people don't know at all, which is why a lot of teams suffer, because whether they are a designer or a researcher, when people don't have that generalist approach, their understanding of UX is actually more narrow. And because of a more narrow set of acumen, basically, that actually limits their ability to benefit the team. And it does not change the fact, and I've said this before a whole bunch of times, that back in the day when one person did everything and then they switched and they started going toward more a specialist model, now you have to hire 4 people instead of 1. And not only did one person do everything back in the day, I was on a team once where there was like 8 or 9 of us and all of us did all the things. Do you know that was like having 36 people, 9 of us, and each one of us could do 4 things? So that was like having 36 people. Today, instead of hiring 9 people to do 36 things, they'll hire 36 people to do 36 things. That's 36 salaries. 36 salaries that are at the same level of the 9. And then people wonder why the layoffs happen. And there's a lot of contributing factors to the layoffs, but this is one of them that a lot of people do not want to face because we created this monster because of the lack of expertise at the leadership level. Because a lot of companies were hiring unqualified people to run their UX teams. They didn't understand the history. It's still happening today. People are saying, we just expanded our team and we brought a person in that knows a little bit about everything. And that team, I laugh when I see it, frankly. Folks can hate me for it. Don't care. It's because people do. I'm just calling out something that you should call out yourself. Truth be told, there's unqualified people that are running UX teams. And this is one, call this an extra bonus item. When people hire the wrong folks to run their UX teams, do you know that that's going to run the UX maturity levels into the ground? That's one of the reasons why you have so many bad job postings, that they're written poorly. And I've seen cases where they're written very well, but the person still doesn't know. A person can do research and write a great job posting. It doesn't mean that individual knows what they're doing. It still doesn't let them off the hook for that. So when companies hire the wrong people to run their UX department, that's guaranteeing that they're going to be massively dysfunctional for the unforeseeable future. And this is happening quite a bit. And they're the ones that actually embrace this whole specialization thing. The team that has more generalists can and will accomplish more than the team that has a bunch of specialists. It's guaranteed because that person that's a generalist knows. I'm not talking about where a generalist was hired, but if you talk to them, they're not really a generalist. They're just in a generalist seat, because that happens a lot too. I'm talking about where people who know what they're doing. I told the story just recently about somebody that was hired into a role and they basically became a UX team of 1, but they were a specialist. And I talked to this person and the person really has no idea which way is up. And so that now the operations, that operation, the UX operation in that organization is massively dysfunctional, and they're not accomplishing what they could because the person who hired that person who didn't know what they were doing basically put somebody in the role that doesn't know what they're doing. So now everybody, the users, the development team, everybody's suffering. And that person, I wish I had somebody to talk to. Really? I've never said that. I've been a team of 1 before, and I never said, although it's nice to have somebody to talk to, that I wasn't suffering because I didn't have anybody to talk to. Matter of fact, I built one team's operation from the ground up. And I had people who were overseas that I talked to, but They were not helping me build from the ground up. We did what we could to support one another's work, but I wasn't dependent on them to accomplish what I was accomplishing. A lot of these people today, they are. And guess what? They're not building anything. That person that I'm talking about is building from the ground up, but nothing's getting built. They're just sitting there with a stack of bricks, metaphorically speaking, but nothing's getting built because they don't know what to build. They don't know what it is. They don't have the history. They just don't know. When you hire somebody with 2 or 3 years of experience to oversee a department's operation, you are saying, and I'm talking to you people running the departments out there, you are saying you have no real concern, you're not really invested, and you don't care what happens to the team going forward. You've got to have qualified people in place. I don't know why it doesn't take rocket science to understand this. It's something that people should be able to do. You can't do that in any discipline. You can't put unqualified people somewhere hoping they'll figure it out and really feel confident that that thing is going to work. And for years, people have been basically pushing the qualified UX person aside. I used to wonder why. I've said this before. I used to wonder why people who've been in UX a long time end up consulting. It's because over time, nobody wants to deal with that person. They assume we want to be paid through the nose. You know who wants to be paid through the nose? Those people who heard that they can get $170,000 for doing nothing. They're the ones that are getting 170, 200. Yeah, this is happening. And they're doing nothing. They're bringing no ROI for the work that they're doing. There's no ROI. They have no idea. They're doing something, and the person who hired them doesn't know how to evaluate what the person is doing. And I have worked for people who don't know what they're doing. So when I do the right thing, they don't know how to judge that either. We must have proper people in place in order for UX to thrive. We must. We must. I told the story before about how I made 50 changes to an interface only for my boss to say, you didn't do anything. He had no idea what I had done. I literally made 50 changes to an interface. If he had taken the time to try to perform certain tasks, he would have seen it. He would have identified the improvements. He would have said, wow, Darren, how in the world did you even see that? But because he did not know, he didn't know how to dissect a micro experience. He didn't know how to do a task analysis. He did not know how to evaluate a user experience based on task flows. He didn't know how to do that. He just looked at it and he said that I didn't do anything. And I know other people have experienced the same. That's ridiculous. And so people who really know what they're doing, we're not valued. We're not understood. We're not treasured. And because of that, everybody ends up suffering. This needs to be fixed. And I guess this is a UX triage moment, but this whole issue with who's being hired to do what, I hope it gets fixed. And I'll share a little bit of that later on as we get into this. But folks, specializations, they're not the way to go. And companies are slowly starting to move back towards the generalist. Now, remember, are you a researcher today? That's fine. You want to do that? Hey, there's plenty of positions out there. And the larger the company is, the more likely you are to find a specialization. But they're going to wake up eventually, too. Somebody there is going to wake up. Even if you're a specialist, do yourself a favor and learn about the parts of UX you don't know. Learn about the parts of UX that are not a part of your everyday operation, and it's going to make you a better specialist. Now, please go try that on for size. I'm sure you'll find that it fits rather well. Number 3, there are people who are told that networking is really critical to your growth in UX. And I'd say generally it's important for anything pretty much. Networking is a cool thing. It's a good thing. But there are some problems because a lot of people, there's a lot of advice flying around UX circles. But a lot of the people who hear the advice, they take it at a surface level and they never really understand how to execute what they heard somebody suggest that you do. So when people say, hey, you need to get out there and network. And so number 3, the third unrealistic expectation I want to call out today has to do with how people embrace networking, but they're doing it the wrong way. Networking should actually be an organic thing. There are times that you will engage in deliberate networking when you reach out to someone because you're trying to make more connections. But there's also, that's not the only way to network. There are some instances, a lot of instances, the best instances of networking, a lot of times, because nothing is 100% with any of these things. But I found that organic networking, something that just happens. Yeah, you can go to a networking event and still do this too, where networking just happens because it's the natural order of things. It's the natural flow. And you could go out there and be deliberate and do it too. But either way, it doesn't really get at what I'm trying to stress with this particular point. Some people only engage with other folks to benefit themselves. So when people embrace networking, when I say the wrong way, whether it's deliberate or whether it's organic, doesn't matter which one, they both happen. Anytime you do either and you are disingenuous, especially when you're only looking for what you get out of that connection, that is going to blow up in your face. That is going to blow up in your face. I love what social media has done. It has allowed all of us to engage with, to meet people we never would have met, we'd never have any interactions with. And so we engage with these people, and a lot of times you just have these wonderful conversations or these wonderful relationships come out of it, and you're able to benefit one another. You're able to learn from one another, and that's great. And that's what networking does. And that's fantastic. Again, whether it's deliberate or whether it is something that happens organically. But a lot of people are starting to speak out about this a lot more. They network and they connect with people, and they connect with people that they find out later that the connection was done from a disingenuous premise. And man, when you find out that somebody connected with you and they don't really care about you, they have no interest in your well-being, all the things that fall into that category, that's one of the most, just the terrible element that's associated with networking. And so if you're willing to network, that's fine. But know and understand, and I hope you get better at recognizing the disingenuous person. Because when you find out, if you don't find out that somebody was disingenuous early on, when you find out, the longer it takes for you to find out that somebody was disingenuous, the more painful that discovery is going to be. And you want to hope that people are going to be forthright with you, but a lot of people aren't. They just simply aren't. And the one I talked about this recently, so I'll bring this up again as an example. I love helping new people. I absolutely love helping new people. And sometimes my heart gets me in trouble because my heart is out there and I'm just putting myself out there. I know a lot of people that are like this too. And when you put yourself out there, there's always somebody who's going to stomp on your heart. So you have to be careful, especially when it comes to maintaining your psychological well-being, because those people are not. They don't care about your psychological well-being, and they're going to stop on it. They're going to tread on it. They're just going to wear it out, and they're going to take it for granted. They are going to abuse it. They're going to take it for granted and abuse it. And you don't want to be in that position. And I was always out there. There was a person I knew who I've known a few people like this actually, and they're out there and they extend themselves as long as you benefit them. But as soon as if they're unemployed, as soon as they get a job, they don't need you anymore, and do everything but literally say as much. And then it gets worse. Then they start to mistreat you. That's when you find out somebody was disingenuous. When they start to do things that flat out hurt you. They actually do you harm. They will drag your name through the mud. And it's really sad. And I experienced that not only at the professional level with people I've worked with, not only just with people that I've networked with. I've met them through networking, and they do this. Frankly, I've had students that have done this. And when you put yourselves out there, just sharing the facts, when you put yourself out there and you have people that are willing to later trash you simply because they no longer have need for you, and they think they don't have need for you. The truth is that they do, which is really sad. And so I'm sort of glad when it happens in a sense, because then I can withdraw myself from this destructive relationship. Because we don't need nobody needs to be in a destructive relationship. And so these disingenuous situations, You just want to develop the ability to spot these people a lot earlier. Sometimes they're easy to spot, and frankly, and nobody's going to get it right 100% of the time. There are going to be people that we thought were on our side. They're not. They're going to be people that we thought supported us. And I know that 6 1 half dozen of the other, a little redundant, but not 100% redundant when I say that. They're not. You think that there are people that think that you are a person that is an asset. But as soon as something happens and you find out, I had somebody say, I love all the stuff that you say, but then you said that thing. As soon as I say something that's not in alignment with someone's treasure chest of anchoring biases, then they're going to check out. Instead of realizing, wait a minute, you've been hearing me for how long? And you know how I think, and you know how I prove things, you know how I lay everything out. If I say something that contradicts an anchoring bias, don't you think it might be worth taking a closer look at that on your own terms? Go and check it out. Because if you can't look at what's said that anybody says, if you can't look at something that anybody says from an objective perspective, that is an ethical matter. Because in order to thrive in UX, and I'm saying it again, something at the core of who we are and what we do requires that we be objective. The UX professional that cannot and will not be objective is going to fall short of optimizing their operation as a UX professional. So if I say something, if one of my guests says something that doesn't resonate with you, it does not mean that me or my guest is wrong. If you're anywhere and you hear somebody say it, it doesn't mean that that person is wrong. It means that you simply don't see it, quote unquote, yet. You don't see it yet. It doesn't mean it's not a thing. So you may have to hanker down and find out, oh man, that hurt. Maybe I need to look at it a little bit more. Yeah, maybe you do. And do yourself and do the discipline a favor. So embrace networking, but just don't do it the wrong way. Don't be disingenuous. Don't be interested in embracing somebody simply because they benefit you and then you're ready to discard them as soon as they're not. We're not disposable cups out here. We're people. And people who still have something, we're still operating within the discipline, and some of us have a lot to say. And so you can't just discard us. If you discard somebody the first time that you feel that you no longer have use for them, that's a bit problematic. It's simply not true. We need each other. We'll never not need each other, and we'll always be able to benefit one another as long as we have the opportunity to do such. And we need to know and understand that today. So let's keep that in mind. Number 4, on the same line, one of the most grossly unrealistic expectations that some people have is that they think that any and everybody that's talking about UX, that they really know what they're talking about, or that they have something to offer. There was an instance once, a story comes to mind, when I was going to speak at an event. And a lot of times when you speak at an online event, you go backstage and nobody can see you, but you can see what's happening for the viewers in the moment. And so I was backstage and I was waiting to go on, and I was listening to someone else's, they were having a Q&A segment. I may have told the story before, but it just weren't sharing it again here. The mindset is that because this person is a speaker, they must know what they're talking about. And everybody who's speaking at any event knows what they're talking about. I have seen a lot of events that I wouldn't touch with a 5,000-foot pole because I know that the person who's doing that, they have an agenda. They don't really care. They don't really know. They've got something else they're trying to accomplish, and the discipline is not really something that they're looking out for. They're looking out for themselves. And I know I can spot people like that. You may not be able to, but I do. And I make it a point to. Sometimes because I've spoken with that person and I know. And that's what happened in this case. This person was wrapping up a Q&A session, and the person was making statements. Matter of fact, several statements. And all of these statements the person was making simply were not true. They were not true. And they actually said in one instance, they said, if anybody tells you when it comes to UX research that they know how to do more than 3 types of research, they're lying to you. And I'm going, whoa. If I remember correctly, they said 3. I don't remember the exact number, but it was something on that line, something ridiculously low, like 2 or 3, something like that. And I'm going, whoa, that was the one that stands out to me for mentioning in this moment. And I knew the person. So, and I knew I'm going to be talking about that in the not too distant future. And now people are going to hear me. They heard what you said. This is what I told the person. They heard what you said. They're going to hear what I said. They're going to get confused. There's 125 minimum, 125 different methods, methodologies, techniques, and deliverables associated with UX research. And we only tend to use 20 to 25 of them regularly, depending upon where you work. But you said if a person can do more than 2 or 3, I can name 5, 6, 7, 8 right off the top of my head in a matter of seconds that I always use pretty much, or that we always lean upon. And so when I say that, somebody's going to think that if they believe you, they think I'm lying. That's really sad. The expectations the person set for the people that assume that person knows what they're talking about, that they're being honest and accurate. That's bad. And when I told the person, I asked the person why they did that, they just made an excuse and they blew it off and they just kept right on going and even had the audacity to come back to me later to ask me to speak at one of their events. And I declined. I can't associate because of that. I can't indirectly demonstrate my support when you're presenting gobbledygook or the equivalent thereof. Will the person say anything that'll benefit folks? Yeah, they will, I'm sure. But they're also going to say a lot of things that's going to hurt people and it's going to send people down the wrong track. Folks, everybody that's talking about UX, especially today, and I say this all the time, there was no misinformation in UX prior to 2011. Now it's everywhere. So, and people who come into UX don't have a filter. So people are coming into the discipline and hearing things that it might be 5, 6, 7 years before they realize, man, that was really garbage. I need to let that go. You don't want to learn things you need to unlearn. That's a waste of time. And how many people are you going to share that untruth with? Now, those people are quote unquote infected. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to impact the discipline in that way. It puts everybody in a compromising position and it does the discipline of user experience a gross disservice. So folks, everybody doesn't know what they're talking about. Authors don't always know what they're talking about. People speaking at conferences don't always know what they're talking about. People that run UX departments don't always know what they're talking about. People sitting next to you in meetings don't always know what they're talking about. Stakeholders and clients don't always know, especially when it comes to UX, don't know what they're talking about. So it is up to us to know and to grow, to build that filter so we can know. And when you come across somebody that doesn't know what they're talking about, you don't have to get all demonstrative and throw them under the bus and things like that. Just make sure you know what you're doing so you can move forward the proper way. And you'll be able to address something in due time and to be able to do it in a professional and a respectful way, not in a way that's going to, again, throw people under the bus and things of that nature. But everybody doesn't know what they're talking about. It's important that we know and understand that. And to expect everybody to know what they're talking about, that's unrealistic. And we need to outgrow that. Last one before we get to the bonus. This whole mindset of standing out, folks. What can I do to stand out? I did this to stand out. And I hear a lot of supposedly seasoned people that are always trying to tell people what they need to do in order to stand out. Guess what? I talked about this before. You can't. Consider this. Standing out, even the way people are talking about it, it's a momentary state. If you could stand out, if it is doable, it only happens within a moment. What about 5 minutes later? That's not really the case. So momentarily standing out, what does that really do for you? And then the mindset about standing out, is it really even possible to stand out? And one of the examples I give all the time was when I was a manager and HR brought me about 300 resumes. And I always ask people, put yourself in my shoes and freeze frame right there. Of those 300 resumes on my desk, how many of them stand out in the moment? And people say, nobody. And I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. So what's the point? And I've got to go through every one of those 300 resumes, which I did. I went through every one and I was looking, did anybody stand out? You know what? In a sense, probably. In a sense. And somebody will say, see, Darren, so then it can. No. I'm addressing this because people need to get this off of your radar. Stop trying to quote unquote stand out. Instead of trying to stand out, how about being truly qualified? How about being truly skilled? Because if there is a possibility of standing out, it's going to be because you're actually more qualified than somebody else. It'll be because you bring something to the table that somebody else doesn't. But when people are talking about standing out, that's not what they're talking about. Shouldn't the most qualified person who's a fit get the job? When people are talking about standing out, they're talking about something that is really a mirage. They're talking about somebody who, in that momentary state, helps a hiring manager to have some kind of epiphany about what they bring to the table. That can't possibly be realistic, is it? No, it's not. It's not. And it's funny when you talk to people, it's like, stand out to whom? Who are you trying to stand out to? Not to mention the fact that a lot of people who are hiring, they don't really know what they're looking for. A lot of people applying for jobs don't fit the bill. So when you have somebody who is hiring, who doesn't know what they're looking for, and you have 300 applicants and only 25 of them are even qualified at all, many of which the hiring manager is not even going to see for God knows what reason, whether it's an AT system or the fact that the hiring manager is burned out, a lot of times they never even come across the person who's the most qualified for the position. And all you have to do is watch people celebrate their hiring on LinkedIn to see that a lot of people, this can't possibly be. I know for a fact, a lot of times when you see that, that wasn't the best applicant. How did the person get there? God only knows. It's really something. So who are you trying to stand out to? I mean, we have this thing that we think that people know what they're doing, and they really don't. So instead of trying to stand out, be their best you, represent your best you, look at jobs for what they really offer, look at what the job responsibilities are, look at the qualifications, and honestly, objectively assess yourself and how qualified you are for that role. And just keep applying, because that's the only way you're going to get something. You're not going to get something if you don't apply. So just keep on applying, keep going for it, and just wait for things to fall out. And I've said this last week, entry-level people, they have, their expectations are unrealistic. They're too high. When you are entry-level, there are going to be very few openings for you. And UX is a saturated discipline, especially when it comes to entry-level folks. And a lot of people keep hiring entry-level people for roles that are more lead-oriented, and they wonder why the operations fall apart. Folks, nobody's here to do you any favors. And some of us actually do labor to be the best us, and we try to be in a position to offer a lot to the organizations where we apply, only to get looked over for reasons that make absolutely no sense. So this is what's happening today, and we need to keep that in mind. Standing out is a mirage. It's not real. Be as qualified as you can be, and then keep trying to make yourself as qualified as you can be. And in between applying for jobs, keep laboring to make yourself more qualified. Stop looking for some magic pixie dust, which is what a lot of people are saying when they say they want to stand out. They're not more qualified. They don't have a greater value prop. They just want to get something. And it's really sad. And that's going to be made more apparent in the next one. Let's move on to our bonus item, shall we? There was a person that I've been interacting with for some time. We always have great interactions, and the person has moved into a hiring manager's role. And you are really going to get a kick out of this. And the person said that he was listening to last week's episode and was really excited from the perspective of how much of that really resonated with him and how accurate. And people tell me this all the time. And the person said there were 4 things that stood out. 4 things that stood out to him. He talked about a lot of the people, and he had 200 resumes he was going through. And he did 50 interviews out of those 200 people. And the thing that he saw the most had to do with people who were lying about their work experience. It happens a lot. A lot of these people get hired. Now, you know why I talk about posers, retrofits, and upstarts? A lot of them are the people who have the fake work experience. They just put something on their resume because they think it'll help them get the interview and the job. They haven't really done what happened on their resume. So those of us that actually have the experience, we get looked at from a very cynical perspective because of the 200 people that have been lying. When they see something, a lot of these hiring managers, they are toast. They are burnt out. And when they come across somebody that really is telling the truth and really brings something to the table, they don't really even want to spend any time trying to get through the analyzing what this person has presented. The ATS systems are not catching these liars. The ATS systems don't know how to catch the liars. They're looking for keywords. They're not lie detectors, so they don't know. This person said that he could tell that there are a lot of people when it came to their learning. He said it's a big red flag, especially when people are applying for a senior level role. He said that people, they get a job and they stop learning. And you could tell these people, I talk about it all the time. If you're going to be in UX, you have to be committed to lifelong learning. And a lot of people, as soon as they get a job, as soon as they get through with a boot camp or whatever, then they're done because the name of the game was to get a job. They have no commitment to the discipline. They have no commitment to a career. They want one of those big UX checks. I know I haven't mentioned what the bonus topic is. I will here shortly. Next, you have overconfidence. I talk about that a lot because you have people, and this person asked people to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10. If you look up the old podcast, and I talk this on YouTube about the UX cycle of excellence, I talk about how people, if you ask them to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10, they will arbitrarily give them a high rating about something, and it's usually going to be inaccurate. And in the UX cycle of excellence, I come up with a more systematic way for somebody to objectively rate themselves. A lot of people don't. And the person was talking about how people on a scale of 1 to 10 were giving themselves these really high ratings on things that they know nothing about. Why? Because they're trying to fake their way, lie their way into a role that they're not qualified for. And they don't care that they're lying because they've got to get that role. So people are overconfident, the Dunning-Kruger mindset that I talk about. And then the last thing the person mentioned, he said that people have a frivolous attitude. They're very, how can I say, aloof. They're not professional. They interview and don't turn on their cameras. That tells you something about the individual. If somebody's not professional in an interview, especially in this day where you can be casual in an interview, some people are casual, but they're too casual to the point that if they get that role, they're going to be overly casual in the role and they're telegraphing it. How do you go to an interview and not turn on your camera? How do you turn on an interview and you're sitting there in pajamas or whatever? He didn't say that, but some people, I have heard about people who do things like that. People sitting in an interview with a baseball cap on. You don't go to an interview with a baseball cap on. That's just not something that you do. People go to interviews and instead of getting in a quiet, secluded place where they won't get distracted, people are sitting in restaurants. If they get the job, they're going to talk to a client and they're going to do the same exact thing. So you have all these aloof people showing you they don't have the level of professionalism that's needed. Now, I said all of this, and I told the person I was going to share this on the show. I just think this is a fantastic take. This is just one of the data sets that I have about such things. I've been seeing this stuff for years. I've been warning people about it for years, but I don't know anything. So it's really sad. The bonus topic is that applicants think that companies know what they're doing, and companies assume, I'm not saying this person did it, I'm saying a lot do. They assume that applicants are forthcoming and honest. They're not. A lot of times when the company and the applicant come together, it's a marriage in dysfunction. And so companies need to stop having the unrealistic expectations that people are professional. They need to stop expecting that people are telling the truth, but don't get cynical because somebody you come across is telling the truth. A lot of times, and we're going to have an episode where we just talk about this in general. I've had so many nightmarish scenarios that I've been in because I've had so many of my interviews sabotaged because people, they knew I knew what I was talking about, but they just didn't want to have to deal with me. So they fabricate something to justify not considering me any longer, or they fabricate it because they want to be able to say that this person that had all this experience really wasn't who he said he was. And they lied. They lied. And then other people embrace that story because they want that to be true as well. Those of us that have been out here doing this work for 15, 20, 25 years or more, we are all that. We do know our stuff like the back of our hand. And people try to make us look bad because they gain something satisfying from that. But if you really cared about your team and you really cared about the discipline, they stopped throwing people like me. And I know a lot of people like me. They stopped throwing us under the bus. All of us are not going to run out and start consulting agencies. All of us don't want to do that. All of us, we don't have to be in a director role. But a lot of directors are afraid, frankly. They're afraid of people like us because they feel we're a threat. I don't want your job. I don't want to have to go to all those politically oriented meetings. I don't want to have to do with that. I just love doing the work. I know other people just love doing the work. That's all we want to do. We just want to do the work. We don't have to be calling the shots, but I would just love to have somebody that I'm dealing with that's honest, an honest boss, an honest operation, people that really care about their users. What a novel idea. But again, folks, applicants think that companies know what they're doing when they're hiring. They don't. Companies think that applicants are being forthcoming. They're not, but some of us are. And I can only hope that more and more of these job employment-oriented marriages where people are a fit can start coming together, because I just see a lot of it that's really bad. And I'm not going to allow all of these dysfunctional scenarios I've seen to stop me from believing that these things are possible, that it can be done the right way, that there are some companies that want to do the right thing, and there are some applicants that want to do the right thing. There are. I'm looking forward to making those connections the rest of my career myself. But we need to understand, folks, as we get ready to wrap up here, unrealistic expectations do not pan out well. They don't result in scenarios that any of us want to have to deal with. Things that we should know that when these things happen, it's going to be bad for everybody involved. And if we, as a committee of one in each individual situations, if we can have the right expectations, then it will help us foster engaging in the right outcomes going forward. Dysfunction is at such a high level today because, frankly, a lot of us are licensing it. But if we can reel these things in, if we can get our head in the right space, we can help things to be better instead of normalizing all this dysfunction that's happening today. Because these things are happening because we're sanctioning it. Let's get our head in the right space. And when we do that and stop accepting other things as normal, we can start to turn the wheel back in the other direction and start making it better for everybody. Agreed? I hope so. And if you don't agree with something I said, it's not going to change anything. I'm not going to change my tune because I've already seen the data that supports all of this. So I'm not going to change it. And you're probably not going to change it either. So, but it's my job to share what I know, to take what I know to be accurate and to share it with the UX discipline at large. And again, I can only hope people embrace it. If this has helped you, I'm glad that it helped you. If it helped the light bulb to come on for you, I'm happy. And if this podcast has helped you, hey, don't forget to give us a like if you're listening on YouTube. If you're listening wherever you get podcasts, don't forget to give us a like. Don't forget to give us a rating. Don't forget to help us get the word out. We want to help vault people forward. That's why we're here, and we're committed to exactly this. So that's all the time we have for today, folks. So until next time, this is Darren Hood, the host of The World of UX, signing off. Happy UXing, everybody.